Helena Blavatsky warned over a century ago about something few were willing to hear. In her most esoteric writings, she mentioned the existence of a substance capable of disconnecting the soul from the body, opening portals to lower planes and making human beings vulnerable to invisible influences. This component was not some exotic poison or a forgotten shamanic drug, but rather alcohol. While the world celebrated this drink in banquets, social rituals, and temples of pleasure, Blavatsky saw in alcohol an instrument of spiritual dissolution, an arcane tool misinterpreted that instead of uplifting fragments. According to her teachings, both theosophical and cultural, it was an agent of vibrational entropy, and not merely a beverage, but the embodiment of al-kul, whose alchemical root, in the more esoteric view, did not refer simply to an ancient black powder, but also to its deeper purpose, separating spirit from matter. What if the consumption of alcohol not only numbs the mind, but breaks the subtle threads that connect us to our higher essence? What if the toast were, in fact, a silent pact with the forgetting of the soul? Helena Blavatsky, in her studies of alchemy, occultism, and the secret doctrines of ancient civilizations, hinted at something as disturbing as it was evident. Alcohol is not simply recreational or cultural, but is profoundly linked to the denser astral plane. For many, alcohol is synonymous with celebration and relaxation, but for Blavatsky, in occult terms, it was a vibrational trap, a mechanism of spiritual dissociation that affects not only physical consciousness, but also the bonds that unite the soul to its higher centers. Since ancient times, humanity has resorted to substances to alter its perception of reality. Some were used to elevate, others to escape. Among them all, alcohol occupies a peculiarly dark place. It was celebrated in pagan festivals, used as archaic medicine, and transformed into a symbol of emotional escapism and psychic rupture. However, few have paused to contemplate its deeper nature and question what happens in invisible realms when this substance comes into contact with the temple of the human body. When we stop seeing alcohol merely through the lens of entertainment or the social conditioning that normalizes it, and observe it through the spiritual prism that Blavatsky explored, the veil begins to tear. The word alcohol has its etymological origin in the Arabic term al-kul or al-ghul, originally associated with a black powder used by alchemists. It was not an intoxicant, but an element employed in transmutation processes. In esoteric circles, this kul symbolized not only a material agent, but something ethereal, capable of separating the spirit from the body and altering the vibrational integrity of the being. Ironically or not, on a subtle level, that is exactly what happens when someone consumes alcohol. They become disconnected, albeit temporarily, from the higher soul, uncentered from their energetic axis, and severed from the internal flow of the logos. If this substance affects not only the mind and body but also the soul, what invisible consequences have we been ignoring? Blavatsky spoke of the veils of Maya, illusory layers that cover humanity's spiritual perception. And from that perspective, we can understand alcohol as one of these veils, a densifying element that prevents the being from remembering its origin and purpose. Instead of expanding consciousness, it fragments it. Instead of leading to higher planes, it opens fissures to lower regions of the astral, where disordered thoughts, primitive desires, and opportunistic entities thrive. In this exploration, we will examine the mystical origin of alcohol, its link to ancient rites of spiritual alchemy, its interference in the flow of vital energy, and its direct impact on human consciousness, not only from a theosophical viewpoint, but also based on warnings found in ancient texts, hermetic teachings, and esoteric wisdom from the initiatic traditions of diverse cultures. We will see how this seemingly harmless substance, in its material expression, can become a tangible barrier to inner growth, and how its consumption, far from being neutral, can open doors that do not lead to the light, but to little understood and even less sealed dimensions. Prepare yourself for an exploration that, if you allow it to resonate within you, may dismantle centuries of normalized beliefs and challenge everything you imagined you knew about this substance so ingrained in everyday life. For what you are about to discover is not mere hidden curiosity or an alternative viewpoint, but knowledge systematically suppressed over the centuries, preserved only by initiates, alchemists, and mystics who understood that the veil of alcohol covers not only the body but the entire being. When revealed, this wisdom will not only change your perception of alcohol, but above all, your perception of yourself, your energy, your consciousness, and your relationship with the divine. Helena, who had access to lost esoteric sources, hidden manuscripts, and wisdom lineages that the modern world ignores, claimed that many of the substances celebrated by humanity, considered divine gifts, were in truth veiled tests for the spirit. Challenges posed not as rewards but as obstacles whose overcoming would reveal the soul's authentic level of evolution. Alcohol has been one of these challenges since the oldest Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations, passing through Greece, Rome, and India, and continuing to the present day. This substance was used in sacred rituals, collective celebrations, and shamanic practices, cloaked in symbolism, tradition, and false spirituality. However, the true mystery schools, those not found in history books, had a deeper, more dangerous and revealing view. Alcohol is not a bridge to the divine, but rather a fog that blurs the inner vision, a substance that, while it can open doors, rarely leads the soul to the light. The very term al-kul, the etymological root of what we call alcohol, comes from medieval Arabic, alluding to a fine black powder used by alchemists. It was not, however, used as an intoxicant, but as a component in transmutation rituals. Blavatsky and other occultists knew that words, like symbols, have various levels of interpretation. In esoteric circles, al-kul did not symbolize merely something physical, but a principle that separates, that divides, that fragments the essence. An agent of dissociation whose symbolic role was to break the unity between body, soul, and spirit. For true spiritual alchemists, not those who sought literal gold but the inner philosopher's stone, any substance that compromised the balance among the three aspects of being was seen as poison to the soul, a silent enemy of awakening. In spiritual alchemy, as Blavatsky details in The Secret Doctrine, refining the human being is a sacred art of internal transmutation, requiring purity of mind, body, and will. Every thought, every action, every substance ingested by the physical organism inevitably affects the subtle field, the aura, the magnetic centers. Any element that destabilizes this harmony becomes an obstacle on the path to enlightenment. Thus, wouldn't it be logical to think that alcohol, in its liquid form, has the same destructive role as al-kul in ancient rituals? Is it not plausible that instead of elevating us to higher dimensions, it binds us to dense, chaotic, and fragmented frequencies? Throughout the centuries, spiritual traditions have approached alcohol in various ways. Some used it symbolically in very specific ritual contexts, but most issued strong warnings about its risks. In Buddhism, for example, the fifth precept speaks of avoiding intoxicants, as they obscure the mind, weaken conscious attention, and generate negative karma, distancing the practitioner from true understanding. This precept is neither symbolic nor metaphorical. It is a direct guidance to preserve lucidity, the only gateway to enlightenment. After all, without clarity and discernment, the torch of consciousness wavers. Blavatsky, aware of the resonance among emotions, desires, and psychic energy, knew that everything in the universe vibrates. Elevated emotions like compassion and loving detachment have high frequencies. Fear, anger, and uncontrolled impulses vibrate at the denser strata of the astral plane, and by ingesting alcohol, that frequency drops, creating a gap between the being and its higher aspect. In this state, the individual becomes susceptible to disordered thoughts, primitive desires, and lurking influences ready to feed on the energy generated by these impulses. When we study the word alcohol from another perspective, we realize that it relates to the idea of al-kul, a subtle poison that dissolves the sovereignty of the spirit over matter. When we refer to alcoholic beverages as spirits, it is not merely a linguistic coincidence or poetic flourish. Many traditions point to a hidden truth. For Blavatsky, every act has occult dimensions, and there is nothing we ingest or think that does not reverberate energetically. The influence alcohol exerts on the subtle bodies is not mere superstition, but a fact experienced and described by mystics, clairvoyants, and practitioners of spiritual arts since ancient times. In mapping the subtle planes, Theosophy describes 7 principles of the human being, including the astral, mental, and spiritual counterparts. Each level has its own laws and sensitivities. Inebriation affects not just cognition and the physical body, but also echoes throughout the energetic web, rupturing the delicate threads of connection that link the being to its divine core. Alcohol addicts, especially those who abuse it for years, often report feeling an existential emptiness, a sense of disconnection from themselves. From an esoteric viewpoint, this is not explained only by the chemical effect. It results from the fissures that form in the astral body, through which vitality and inner coherence leak. This is why, in many cultures, the consumption of alcohol was strictly restricted or even prohibited in spiritual environments and practices. Not out of dogmatism, but from the understanding that any substance that depresses consciousness and fragments energetic alignment hinders inner growth. Blavatsky saw alcohol as a kind of mediator for lower frequencies. Instead of opening portals to enlightenment, it opens passages to obscure regions of the astral. In those regions, one's inner light is overshadowed, and the human being becomes easy prey for invisible forces that feed on disorganized energy. It is no coincidence that so many cultures, in different eras and places, refer to excessive alcohol consumption as being possessed by spirits or losing the soul temporarily. For Helena Blavatsky, these expressions were not just metaphors but reflections of a spiritual truth. By artificially altering consciousness, the individual allows the noblest part of their essence to momentarily withdraw, leaving gaps through which opportunistic entities can enter. In environments where alcohol is celebrated without consciousness, episodes of violence, abuse, verbal or physical aggression often arise. These are signs that there is, in that moment, a suspension of spiritual sovereignty over the personality and space for destructive forces to express themselves. She emphasized that on the path of evolution, every act, every decision, and every ingested substance affects an individual's vibration, attracting or repelling experiences. In other words, the law of karma, cause and effect, never fails. What we vibrate determines what we attract. When we drink excessively, we tune in to lower vibrational ranges, and this is reflected in our experiences, relationships, and life paths. Reflecting on the warnings of Blavatsky and of so many other traditions, we should note that the message is neither moralistic nor punitive, but rather an alert about the destructive and numbing potential of alcohol. It's a matter of choices and consequences, especially spiritual ones. Those who seek true awakening must ask themselves, which part of me falls silent when I drink? What, in my psyche, am I anesthetizing with alcohol? And above all, what am I inviting into my energetic field? When Blavatsky dedicated long pages of her work to the relationship between the physical and astral planes, she repeatedly pointed out the correspondence between the seeker's inner state and the level of reality with which they interact. If the individual vibrates in harmony, they attract luminous experiences, higher spiritual connections, and a life more coherent with their essence. If they descend to dense vibrations, they attract conflict, parasitic forces, and gradually lose memory of their higher purpose. This is, in short, the risk of alcohol, being the involuntary doorway to vibrational decline, with repercussions far beyond physical hangovers. But even for those who have found themselves submerged in the habit, Blavatsky suggested paths to recovery based on energetic purification practices and reconnection with the higher self. Such methods involve daily meditation, conscious fasting, the use of cleansing plants, salt baths, and sincere prayer, among others. The goal is to gradually rebuild the damaged, subtle structures and regain spiritual lucidity. After all, theosophical understanding is that nothing is lost forever. Everything can be healed when approached with will, awareness, and the aid of inner light. Central to this process is the understanding that the body is not mere disposable matter, but a sacred sanctuary where the spirit dwells and carries out its mission on earth. When successive intoxications undermine this sanctuary, the soul suffers because it loses its most immediate vehicle of expression. Restoring this dwelling is essential for the being to flourish in its wholeness and fulfill its role in the universal tapestry. Without this restoration, one risks wandering through existence as a fragment, unconscious of oneself, repeating old cycles of pain and stagnation. When addressing the role of alcohol within religious traditions, Blavatsky mentioned the precepts of various doctrines that, though they differ in external practices, coincided in cautioning against intoxicants. Such is the case in Buddhism, the aforementioned fifth precept; Hinduism, which emphasizes the purity of the nadis and prana; Islam, which regards alcohol as a distraction from the spiritual path; and certain mystical Christian currents that abhorred the state of drunkenness. And in shamanic cultures we often see that, while some psychoactive plants were used in very specific rituals, alcohol did not hold the same status as a sacred substance. On the contrary, its presence was usually associated with the dissolution of the bond with healing spirits and the approach of darker entities. All these converging teachings indicate that the danger does not lie merely in the misuse of alcohol, but in its very nature as a separator of the spheres of being. Even when consumed in moderation, it acts to varying degrees as an inhibitor of vibrational ascension. It is not our place here to judge those who choose to drink, but rather to bring to light the deeper and often ignored implications of that decision. Each individual must decide whether or not to traverse these veils that Blavatsky described. Over the years, the trivialization of alcohol has intensified. Advertisements extol it as a source of fun, sophistication, and creativity. However, from the occult perspective, it remains a dissonant element that hinders alignment with the soul. And in a world where so many seek a deeper spiritual meaning, there is an urgent need to reflect on what we ingest, not just in our stomachs, but into our energetic fields. The question Blavatsky would pose is, are we ready to see what truly occurs beyond illusion when we raise a toast? Following this trail, many might be tempted to conclude that alcohol is the great villain. But Blavatsky, always cautious, would remind us, the true villain is ignorance, the forgetting of who we are. Alcohol is merely a tool that, when misused, intensifies that amnesia, making us more vulnerable to the chaotic currents of the lower astral, to entities that feed on states of torpor, and to the thoughts that sabotage growth. At the same time, there is no eternal guilt. The path to restoration is always available to anyone who decides to regain control of their own energy and rebuild the bridge to their inner light. In short, Helena Blavatsky's warning reverberates through time. Alcohol is neither innocuous nor merely a sociable stimulant. It is a hidden force that operates in invisible realms. Understanding this is fundamental for those who seek to tread the path of self-knowledge and elevation of the being. The veil of alcohol not only covers our capacity for conscious discernment, but envelops our entire subtle structure, making it susceptible to unwanted invasions and delaying the reunion with our divine nature. Recognizing this is one more step in the journey back to our essence, which, according to Blavatsky, lies beyond all veils, mists, and substances that distract us from the supreme truth. We are light in potential, and awakening that light requires clarity, right intention, and a resonance that alcohol cannot offer but only delay. To deepen this reflection, it is worth noting that Blavatsky's criticism of alcohol is not confined to a personal or isolated view. Many great spiritual masters and teachers in different contexts also addressed the issue of intoxication and clouded consciousness. The history of religions and initiatic schools shows that humanity has always sought to transcend the ordinary, rising to more refined states of perception. On that path, Anything that hinders lucidity and reduces the connection to the divine must be seen as a potential impediment. At the core of theosophical thought is the notion that each individual is responsible for their choices and must bear the karmic consequences of them. Thus, by ingesting substances that disturb one's internal harmony, we are not punished by some external deity, but by the natural reaction these substances provoke in our vibrational field. A drop in frequency leads to forgetting our true spiritual identity, opening space for disintegrating forces to find shelter in us. In that sense, the inner fortress, built through meditation, self-observation, and spiritual study, becomes a kind of protective shield. When that shield is weakened by alcohol, the mind loses its guiding thread, discernment becomes muddled, and the heart closes to higher inspirations. It is as though the inner compass that points us toward our evolution becomes temporarily demagnetized. We can observe that in certain cultures, alcohol was integrated into religious ceremonies in a symbolic way, but often with a strong warning about excesses. Drunkenness has never been considered a pathway to the sacred. On the contrary, the sacred requires presence, clarity, wholeness of being. Beverages like wine may appear in biblical passages or pagan rites, but it is well known that, in the mystical currents of those same traditions, doses were minimal, governed by strict rituals, and almost always accompanied by practices of mental purification. If humanity as a whole understood the occult mechanisms described by Blavatsky, our relationship with alcohol might be very different. The simple, unrestrained sale, the advertising that glamorizes drunkenness, and the lack of spiritual instruction combine to create a culture in which drinking without limits becomes normal. This normality hides the fact that, on deeper levels, we are opening ourselves up to experiences that can leave persistent, energetic marks. From the perspective of integral health, it is not uncommon to see people who, even after leaving addiction behind, still experience emotional or psychological after-effects. From the theosophical point of view, these after-effects can be understood as auric reverberations, scars in the subtle structure that need care, therapy, and restorative practices to be fully healed. Ridding oneself of alcohol physically is only the first step. Real healing involves restoring the connection with the soul, re-establishing inner balance, and, often, repairing damage to family and social relationships compromised under the influence of intoxication. Another important key in Blavatsky's thought is the need to seek a life aligned with higher principles. The energy wasted on habits that numb the self could be employed in creative practices, in service to others, in studies that expand the mind, and in contemplations that align the heart with universal love. For the sincere theosophist, each day on earth is an opportunity to polish the rough stone of the ego, removing edges and becoming ever more able to channel higher forces. Yet the task is not trivial. We live in a civilization brimming with stimuli that encourage consumption. A trillion-dollar industry is devoted to producing and marketing alcoholic beverages, celebrating their supposed benefits without ever addressing the spiritual consequences. And from the strictly materialistic standpoint, speaking of astral planes, vibrations and invisible forces is a huge taboo, relegated to superstition. Blavatsky broke with that paradigm by boldly exposing what she called the secret doctrine, a line of knowledge that runs through esoteric traditions and had never been fully revealed to the public. In that doctrine, the human being is seen as a particle of the divine, endowed with free will to choose its destiny. And this power of choice is what makes spiritual responsibility so pressing. If everything is vibration, then how we relate to alcohol determines not only our physical well-being, but also the kinds of entities, currents, and energetic flows we attract. In that process, there is no evil that cannot be overcome, nor is there any fall that cannot be reversed. But the price is vigilance, self-knowledge, and discipline. It is essential to understand that giving up alcohol, if that is one's choice, does not mean renouncing pleasure or moments of relaxation. There are countless ways to celebrate and commune that do not require intoxication. One can organize musical gatherings, dances, outdoor get-togethers, discussion groups, and meditative practices that generate integration, contentment, and upliftment. The spiritual path does not propose suffering as a virtue. It proposes genuine joy, one that arises from inner harmony and cohesion with the cosmos. From this viewpoint, every step toward sobriety and lucidity is also an act of love for the world. As each individual raises their frequency, they become a point of light, radiating clarity and serenity to those around them. This vision describes a humanity that transforms itself from the inside out, abandoning destructive habits and replacing them with expressions of creativity and spirituality. Blavatsky would surely applaud any such initiative, as her primary mission was to contribute to humanity's awakening toward its own inner greatness. Diving deeper into the matter, it's worth noting that many therapeutic approaches today, even if not explicitly esoteric, end up touching on points Blavatsky had already highlighted. Modern psychology, when well integrated with holistic perspectives, recognizes that substance addiction is rarely merely physiological. It involves trauma, emotional wounds, the need for acceptance, and often an unconscious quest for something greater. Alcohol, in the absence of spiritual understanding, becomes the palliative that dulls existential pain. Comment 100% if you've made it this far. Few go so far, but those who do are not mere spectators. They are seekers of truth, and you are one of them. Thus, therapeutic processes aimed at overcoming addiction frequently include meditation, mindfulness, breathing techniques, and other practices that, in some way, lead the individual to states of presence and self-reflection, states that could be called the beginning of reconnection with the soul in theosophical terminology. Although they do not use Blavatsky's same vocabulary, they confirm the thesis that we must restructure not just the body, but also the deeper psyche to break free from a cycle of dependence. Some schools also study the impact of sound frequencies and subtle vibrations in rehabilitation. Practices like music therapy, sound baths with crystal bowls, shamanic drumming, or even chanting sacred mantras show positive results in lifting one's spirits and restoring identity. All this echoes theosophical teachings, which hold that the universe is rhythm, sound, resonance, and that we can access higher spheres through vibrational harmony. Clearly, this does not entail rejecting scientific and pharmacological contributions to dealing with alcoholism. But ignoring the invisible side of human beings means addressing only half the issue. Ultimately, Blavatsky advocated an integration of all levels of knowledge to encompass the complexity of existence. In an ideal future, medical practices might work in harmony with energetic approaches, considering the aura, chakras, and spiritual connections of each patient. Practically speaking, if you, reader, or someone close to you faces the challenge of alcohol, it may be worthwhile to consider not only traditional strategies, therapy, support groups, etc., but also an inner investigation that includes spiritual aspects. Ask yourself, what emptiness am I trying to fill? Which emotional wound am I masking? What does my soul truly desire? Directing this quest inward can start building a new path, grounded in self-fulfillment and communion with the divine. Every human being has the capacity within to return to a higher vibration, to purify themselves, and to rediscover their true nature. Alcohol appears in this journey not as a sin, but as an obstacle we often accept naively. Overcoming it, or even transcending the need for it, becomes an act of courage and a remembrance of who we are. After all, what we really seek is reconnection with the boundless source of light and creation, and nothing, absolutely nothing, should take us away from it. With this perspective, we conclude this discussion hoping that the reader may reflect on Blavatsky's warnings, understanding that they go far beyond moral or religious discourse. They point to universal laws that govern the harmony of the being and to the responsibility each of us carries to keep the flame of consciousness burning. May we remain attentive, lucid, and loving in a world that constantly invites us to forget and flee. The path of self-knowledge demands presence, and presence is the antithesis of inebriation. If you have made it this far, congratulations. It's no small feat to follow such a dense and reflective video. But true seekers are the ones who go to the end, precisely those who sense between the lines the voice of their own spirit, calling them to awaken. May your journey be illuminated, and may the wisdom of Helena Blavatsky, as well as that of other great souls, serve as a guide to a life full of consciousness and inner fulfillment. Always remember, the power to choose remains in your hands, and every choice we make reverberates through the subtle fabric of the universe, shaping the destiny we ourselves will inhabit. See you in the next video.